Oh, caught in a bad romance. Oh, caught in a bad romance. Whoa, won't I stop? Ah, ooh la la, till we have suffrage. Whoa, won't I stop? Ah, ooh la la, till we have suffrage. It's gotten ugly, they passed the 15. Still women have no right, no guarantee to liberty. Child health, wealth, or property. We'll raise our banner across this land, 'cause franchise isn't just the right of a man. You never sold, yeah, to never sold. You know we don't want to take freedoms from you, just want our rights and nothing less. We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We love all people, not just male citizens, form this most perfect union. Oh, caught in a bad romance. Oh, caught in a bad romance. Oh, won't I stop? Ah, ooh la la, till we have suffrage. It is a horror, a cruel design that makes it criminal, a right that is mine. I want the vote, vote, I want to vote. The rights of citizens shall not be denied or abridged by the United States on account of sex. We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We love all people, not just male citizens, form this most perfect union. Oh, caught in a bad romance. Oh, caught in a bad romance. Won't I stop? Ah, ooh la la, till we have suffrage. March, be courageous, fighting for our rights. We may just start greatness for the ages. Freedom, it is contagious. March, be courageous, fighting for our rights. We may just start greatness for the ages. Remember the ladies, not to be above, but equal to all men. We only ask to be part of this union. Comme dirait le français, c'est démocratie. Permettez-moi participer. I'm a citizen of this nation. An American. I want suffrage and independence. We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We the whole people, not just male citizens, form this most perfect union. I wanna wear pants. Caught in a bad romance. I want my suffrage and independence. Caught in a bad romance. Won't I stop? Ha, ooh la la, now we have suffrage.
intersectional feminists, we recognize that stories are often much more complicated than written in history books. One of our jobs at the Women's Forum Collaborative is to make sure that Ventura County has access to some of those less told stories, in this case, around women's suffrage. Radical change like women's suffrage requires multiple strategies, alliances, agreements, and coalitions to mobilize masses of people and create a movement that can overcome the status quo. Often we hear about the heroic few suffragists: Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, maybe even Lucy Stone, primarily middle and upper-class white women who had more time and means to devote to social movements than others. But they were surrounded by many more. A few women simply would not have had the political power to accomplish the 19th Amendment otherwise. The right to vote was a complicated 7-decade struggle started by women who didn't live to see women's suffrage come to fruition, and celebrated by women who weren't alive when the movement started. We are here to highlight 5 of the less told stories of the suffrage movement: those of Native American culture, Black suffragists, multiple, often competing strategies, communication in the media, and working women. First, we would like to highlight the role of Native American culture. According to the book We Want Equal Rights, early suffragists were influenced by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, a powerful Native American confederacy in the Northeast that followed a matriarchal system where women and men governed together with equal rights and equal authority. This was in stark contrast to how women in the United States were considered and treated. Native American women supported the women's suffrage movement to the end, even participating in the 1913 March on Washington, D.C. We Want Equal Rights can be ordered now at nativevoicesbooks.com. Second, we would like to highlight the role of Black suffragists. While Black women such as Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, and Mary Church Terrell, and Black men such as Frederick Douglass were critical to the women's suffrage movement, often their stories as suffragists take a back seat to their roles as abolitionists. History books often oversimplify, choosing race or gender, even though in reality both movements are intertwined, with an intersectional push-pull between race and gender. Black women fought alongside white women and attempted to build interracial alliances, yet ultimately had to fight white women, and when denied inclusion, formed their own national organization. Leading white suffragists such as Alice Paul believed that fighting racial issues at the same time would compromise white women from getting the vote. Black women were excluded at conventions by the National American Woman Suffrage Association. Black women were forced to march separately in suffrage parades. And while Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony supported the abolition of slavery, full citizenship rights for freed slaves, and fought for both men and women to be included in the 15th Amendment, when they wrote their book, The History of Woman Suffrage, they overlooked the contributions of Black suffragists, favoring efforts in line with theirs and less with their competitors. Which brings us to our third story. The suffrage movement was not a cohesive movement. It was a difficult and complicated political and social struggle that lasted over 7 decades. For over 2 of those decades, there were 2 separate competing national suffrage organizations, the National Woman Suffrage Association and the American Woman Suffrage Association, until they merged into the more united National American Woman Suffrage Association in 1890. In fact, many organizations, sororities, and clubs, national, state, and local, were involved, each with a different strategy for attacking the issue. Some believed that the right to vote should be fought on a state-by-state basis, while others believed it should be fought at the federal level. Some believed that women needed to work within the system, using indirect influence on the men who would be voting on the issue, while others believed in a more direct, media-driven, attention-getting, and radical approach that included parades, protest, public unrest, imprisonment, hunger strikes, and cross-country caravans. Some took advantage of wartime and anti-immigrant sentiments to make the case that women should get the right to vote if foreign-born men had the right to vote. Others argued that women should get the right to vote to fight drunkenness and the abuse often caused by it. Sometimes groups simply couldn't coordinate or communicate with each other. This was a coast-to-coast, nationwide movement without the internet, televisions, interstate highways, or even telephones, moving film, radios, or paved roads. Communication to the masses was unimaginably difficult compared to the options we have today. Which is why the fourth less told story is about communication and the role of media. The primary modes of communication at the time were through print, letters, telegraphs, and telegrams, newspapers, newsletters, and pamphlets. The National Association published its own periodical, The Suffragist, and wrote press releases for other newspapers and magazines. Sometimes press attention was quite negative. Sometimes it promoted the cause. Much like today, any attention to a cause might be considered positive, as it could get people thinking and talking about issues they might not otherwise think about or discuss. Hopefully, over time, truth and justice prevail. Finally, we must highlight the important role of working women. At the turn of the century, the U.S. saw the rise of populism, industrialization, immigration, foreign war, and an increase of women in the workforce and labor unions. All of these boosted the power and reach of the suffrage movement to masses of women. Working women had experienced poor working conditions, abuse, and low wages. The right to vote was key to changing that. The National Association saw these women as the future of the movement and formed the Equality League of Self-Supporting Women. Working women were motivated and organized. They had experience with picketing, protesting, and striking. They marched together by occupation in women's marches. And it became especially difficult to deny that women could work, wear pants, and care for their families when they were holding down the fort while their husbands were fighting overseas. World War I lasted until 1918, and the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. Suffragists fought for over 70 years. For efficiency and simplicity, history books highlight a few key stories, but this movement was much larger, persistent, and complicated than that. People of color, competing efforts, communication, and alliances all played into the achievement of the 19th Amendment. Today, we hear cries for justice that mirror the suffrage movement. We see solidarity between groups of people crying for justice for all. We see multiple strategies for attacking problems. We use media to communicate faster and more effectively than ever before. And we continue to fight until truth and justice prevail.
Hello, my name is Sue Osborne. I'm a longtime board member of the Ventura County Professional Women's Network. From the mid-19th century, until early in the 20th century, American women actively pursued a civil right that should have been available to all citizens under our Constitution. They protested for more than 70 years to win that right. Now, 100 years later, young women continue protesting for causes that involve civil rights, human rights, and the care of this precious planet that we all call home. Globally, we hear such voices as Malala Yousafzai and Greta Thunberg. Nationally, we hear the voices of Emma Gonzalez and Yara Shahidi. And here at home, we have our own young women's voices. We posed a single question to young women in Ventura County, and because they themselves have very busy lives, only a few had time to answer. We're sharing those answers with you here today. The question we asked: why is voting important to you? Enjoy.
My name is Dylan, I'm 15 years old, and I'm looking forward to voting because I'm excited to make my voice heard in our government. I believe that voting is one of the most powerful ways we have to making our communities and our country a better place. I've seen the power that a caring elected official has, and I've seen the damage that a corrupt elected official can cause. So I'm looking forward to voting in representatives who actually understand, care about, and listen to the people they're representing.
My name is Elise and I'm 16. Voting is important to me because it's important to have your voice heard in politics. I've also pre-registered to vote and will be eligible in 2022.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm 17. I haven't voted yet and I won't be able to vote in this year's elections, but I'm very excited to vote in next year's state and local elections. Voting is one of the most important rights that you can have in a democracy. And in the US, voting is really the only right that is specifically guaranteed under the Constitution to all sexes. So it's really important that we exercise this right.